I know we got some wonderful food coming up after this, and everybody wants to have some more fellowship time, so we are here together today to remember and say goodbye to a great man, Mr. Gary Radloff. I'm sure that each of us in our own way have done this or attempted to do this already, but this is an opportunity to do it together. And I think that there is something to that. I think that there is real power in that. Coming together to remember, to comfort, to laugh, to be a family. As with all of us here, Gary was a man of many facets. I think of the movie Shrek, where the characters discuss being like an onion with many layers. I'm not going to call Gary an ogre. But humans are like that. We are complicated beings. But what is at the heart of it? What is at the center of who we are? What was at the center of what Gary was? Well, I think to see that, we don't have to look very far. We can look at his life and see what was central to it. What was at the core of his life and his values, who he was. Gary grew up working at his family's resort. As he moved into adulthood, he worked as a police officer in Blaine, Minnesota. He was a paramedic for Mercy Unity Hospital for almost 30 years. In his retirement, he worked as a bailiff for the Cook County Sheriff's Department, where he was awarded the Medal of Valor for his services. This was a man who spent his career, his life, helping and serving others. This was what was central to who he was. This is where his heart was, in helping others. His was indeed a life of service. There were many times in his life of service where he was with people who were in their last hours and even minutes of their life. Obviously, as a paramedic and as a law enforcement officer, it was his job and his calling to try and hold off the hand of death. But at times it was inevitable, and he was the one who was put there to comfort others and to just be there with them in their last moments. What a gift. What an incredible gift to be called to do that. I'm sure at times it was a hard gift, but what a gift nonetheless. To be called to help and comfort others in their greatest time of need. To be called to protect others when they cannot protect themselves. This was not just public service, but this was a love of his fellow human. And this is what I believe was at the core of Gary. You also see this love when you look at his family. He was a father, a grandfather, a brother, a husband. 55 years. That is some love. After Gary's passing, a note he had written to Janet resurfaced after the sale of their home. It must have been written around Christmas time because the title said, "Merry Christmas, Janet," with a heart drawn around the word Janet. It was a letter that professed his love of his wife for over 50 years. It was a note that thanked her for everything she had done for him and for their family. A note that professed gratefulness to Janet for the children they had raised together, for standing beside each other through good times and bad, for fidelity, for selflessness, for understanding. A note summed up in the final 4 words of, "I love you, Janet." This is who Gary was. And that is why we miss him. That is why we mourn. The reading from Revelations tells us there will be a time when God will wipe away all the tears from our eyes. A time when grief, pain, and even death will be no more. I believe this with all my heart. But what do we do in the meanwhile? What do we do before this beautiful vision comes to pass? How do we fill the hole we feel in our lives and in our hearts? Well, we can take a lesson from Gary's life. We can serve each other, and we can love each other. The second reading from Romans asks us, who and what can separate us from the love of Christ? The answer is a resounding nothing. Neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present or to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. This love is what brings us and binds us together today. A love for Gary and the love that he carried within himself. This is what we can carry in our hearts. This is what was shared when Gary was here with us and what is still shared after his passing. Love, dedication, service, the values and pillars that Gary lived his life by. Now some of Gary's ashes are going to be given back to the earth, back to this lake that he so loved. So whenever we look at this majestic lake, we will think of him. We will think of the stories and memories that he has given us, a gift that continues to give today. We will think of his service to his fellow man, and we will think of the love he shared for his family and for all of us. And we will try and do likewise, and in doing so, a piece of him will remain with us always. Well, there will be plenty of time for discussion and chit-chat after the service, but at this time, the family would like to offer the opportunity for anyone out here who wishes to share a memory or reflection or anything in regards to Gary. Feel free to do so now. Don't feel pressured to, but if you have something you want to say, please stand up and let us know.
My name is Michael Valentini. Gary and I go way back. I worked with Gary as a paramedic at Mercy Unity Ambulance Service back in the 70s and early 80s. And in fact, maybe the last 3 years, Gary and I were a team just because we scheduled our schedules together. And I would venture to say a very unlikely team. It's easy to look back and say that our two lifestyles were vastly different back in those days. And yet we really did work well together. And Gary and I have a lot of memories and a lot of stories. And it was so unique to come back up to Cook County and find out that Gary and I hooked up again. So it was nice to see him again, and Jan. And I didn't know Gary or Becky very well, but I knew of them because we always told stories. The only thing sacrilegious I remember telling Gary that didn't go over well at the time was he was buying a new boat for the lake, and he wanted to come up with a name for the boat. And personally, I thought Titanic 2 would be appropriate, or Andrea Doria, but the reaction I got from Gary when I mentioned that was really quite priceless. But I miss Gary. I just think back to the times we had together and the work we did together, and the crew that we were, and it's great to be here and just to share memories with Gary and Gary with his family and friends.